So welcome everyone to the event show live, where we're giving a voice to the event industry. We've been running a podcast off and on for a couple of years now, but obviously thought, given the current situation that we all find ourselves in, there's obviously a real demand to talk more, support each other and hear from each other. So we've decided to run these sessions each week over the coming weeks, and obviously hopefully give you some thoughts to walk away with and use in your work and in your lives. And we've obviously got a great panel with us today. So morning, Steve. Steve's from Sport Projects. Sorry.
Hey folks, good morning. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Steve. And Thomas Staunton, who's Executive Director at Sold Out Events, who many of you will also know.
Yes, hello everyone. Hi Andrew, thanks for having us.
Very good. And Shannan Gove, who again, lots of you will know from his role as Director at Rosterfy. Morning, Shannan.
Good morning, mates, and thanks for having us on.
Great to have you all here. Thanks for giving up your time, and thanks to everyone who's tuning in. I just wanted to call out, I suppose, before we start, that we're all going to have similar but potentially different challenges and opportunities in front of us. So we're trying to make sure these sessions are obviously relevant to you, and we'll obviously ask questions that we hope will give you some relevant knowledge to walk away with. But please do drop your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll of course try and get to as many of those as we can throughout the show today. I should obviously introduce myself for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to meet or work with. I've been in the industry for 25 or so years, worked on the major events and had the opportunity to work with a number of you across Commonwealth Games and World Championships, World Cups, all sorts of major events in professional sport. I also ran an agency, Limelight Sports, for 10 years. Working with some big brands, the Nikes and JP Morgans of the world, a lot of local government work, national sports organisations, charities, cause-related events. So hopefully have some empathy, I suppose, in terms of where each of you might be sitting within your organisations and some of the things that you'll be going through. The last couple of years I've been out working as an event advisor, working with various event teams and helping people create successful events and have more success themselves as event people. So I suppose one of the common things that I hear when I'm out working with different organisations is we do want to come together and collaborate more and share our stories and our challenges as much as possible. So the event show's been one of the initiatives to try and bring us together as much as we can. So that's me. But again, thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to jump into it all and go to our panel. So do drop your questions in that Q&A box and we'll get to them as we go. But first up, I want to go to Steve. And Steve, you're Managing Director at Sport Projects, and many people will be familiar with your work. But I just wanted to, I suppose, check in terms of this week. Obviously, would have looked quite different than what you would have anticipated, and what you would have been through in recent years across the Easter period with the Run for the Kids and what have you. But keen to hear in terms of a bit about what your role involves and what's going on for you right now.
Yeah, for sure. Look, it's not just this week, but the last month has obviously been very, very different. I think that said, this time of year we would tend to be, almost tickling into that sort of post-season phase anyway. So I think from our perspective, it's meant that post-season phase has certainly come forward a little bit. So Sport Projects is my business. We've been running for, coming up to 5 years, largely sport and sort of participation based, outdoor events. So our season tends to be October to April-ish. And certainly we've been affected by the mass gathering bans, and it's had a dramatic impact on what we're doing, and and I suppose the flow-on effect to our staff and consumers, etc. You know, I think we've been working remotely for about just coming up to 4 weeks now. So we've all been out in our own respective lounge rooms, in my case, bedroom. And yeah, you know, it's been interesting process, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And how's your team, I suppose, coping with it all, and how have they reacted and worked together during?
Yeah, so we've got a you know, effectively a permanent staff of 5. So you know, that core team, you know, we've been meeting as a group each day in the afternoon. You know, I think it's fair to say that we've probably, you know, diverted some of our attention into you know, some of those processes and procedures that we've probably neglected over time. You know, like, it's realistically, it's such a busy time generally all year round that, you know, as much as you get to that post-season phase and you want to lean in and sort of look internally and spend some time looking at how you're doing your business, you don't always get the luxury of that. So I think that's what we've been trying to make the best of a bad situation and do some of those things, which you know, which has been pretty refreshing actually. It's been good, and I think you know, it's about sort of almost setting yourself up to hit the ground running, you know, once we all get you know, back on the ground, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. It's very true, isn't it? We don't often get the time to do the things we'd like to be doing. So I think it's a good way to frame this period and approach this phase, isn't it? I know, Steve, you reacted as you needed to, I suppose, very quickly in terms of changing the way that you and your team worked, and you would have had to have been involved in some pretty difficult and quick decisions, both, I suppose, how it affected your team and your organisation, but also some of the events you're involved with as well.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, I think the cancellation of the Grand Prix was, you know, clearly a landmark trigger point, really, that you know, sent the dominoes rolling, so to speak. There's no doubt it, not just within our industry, actually. You know, I've spoke to a lot of people outside of our events industry, and that was a real landmark moment. Even, you know, outside of events, to sort of almost like stand people up, essentially, to how serious this situation is. And yeah, absolutely. You know, that I remember that weekend. Immediately, it was yeah. You know, I spent all sorts of time in my spreadsheets and all these sorts of things, and yeah, had to make, you know, a series of pretty tough and challenging decisions. You know, get all the team together, you know, first thing Monday that next week, and, you know, I suppose detail and communicate some of those bad decisions, or, you know, not bad decisions, but, you know, tough decisions. You know, they were the right decisions, but, you know, they're not the types of decisions you want to make, that's for sure. And, you know, hopefully we don't live through too many of these type of periods, that's for sure.
No, that's right. That's right.
But certainly, you know, Run for the Kids was probably, you know, the most immediate sort of impact for us as a project, and a major project that we've been working on for you know, for coming on 5 years. So you know, it was you know, it was an event that it's obviously you know, almost bigger than the event itself in terms of the cause that we work for, and so, you know, for a long time we were working with the client and trying to give it every chance to run, but, you know, it obviously got to the point where it was you know, absolutely the right decision to you know, to put it aside. It was interesting to see how fast it actually moved in the end. You know, I think we were probably toying with the idea of most of the impact of the pandemic coming in sort of post Run for the Kids. Little did we know that it just moved so quickly, you know, to the point where we were absolutely all, you know, everyone was in lockdown come Run for the Kids time. So yeah, really, you know, just, you know, I suppose, well, I think we've run out of words to describe it, haven't we? But it's certainly felt surreal for weeks and weeks, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely surreal and unprecedented, and these are the words I think we've been using a lot of, isn't it? Yeah, And you're right, some tough decisions needed to be made, but they did need to be made, didn't they? And it's unfortunate. I guess, have you noticed with the likes of the cancellation of the Run for the Kids, it really highlights how many people and organisations are involved with an event and the supplier networks and I suppose how people reacted more broadly in terms of those relationships that you've got.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's that's been probably the toughest thing, I reckon, Andy, over the last few weeks. It's just, you know, having those sort of daily conversations with your wider network, and you know, you can sense it in their voice that you know, just how tough it is out there. You know, you've got event suppliers out there who, you know, this is not just their bread and butter; it's the jam on top, and it's you know, every part of what they rely on, and you know, to switch that off overnight is, you know, just you know, the impact is immense. So you know, so I think from our perspective, we haven't felt, you know, as challenging as it's been, we've probably not felt the impact as much as some. And so, you know, it's really important to try to be really mindful of that, and you know, and try to reach out and support that network wherever you can.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I think they're really, really good, important messages and mindsets, I guess, that we need to be having at this time. Appreciate your thoughts, Steve. We're going to obviously come back to you to sort of dive a bit deeper into some things, but I'll introduce Thomas Staunton, who's Executive Director at Sold Out Events. And Thomas, I'm keen to hear a bit about your world. You obviously you're based in Sydney, but work across Australia. So keen to, perhaps you can just give us a quick rundown of your role, and for those of you that aren't familiar with your organisation, and you know, how this has affected you in the recent weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just, you know, to start off with, Steve, we definitely, you know, we echo all of your sentiments. So for those of you who know me, you'll know my role in the business. Sold Out, 26 years, full service event agency. So we're in quite a fortunate position where our services that we provide to clients are both short-term, medium-term and long-term. So at the moment, you know, we're working on projects 8, 12, 16, 18 months away already. So at the moment, our world is quite layered. I think we felt the same as everybody felt, those immediate cancellations. Actually on Friday the 13th, when the capacity restrictions were put into place, I was driving down the South Coast for a 50th birthday party, and the announcement was made, and then the phone rang, and it didn't stop ringing. And that was all of those short-term, immediate cancellations that needed to be put into place and actioned quite quickly. And then we have, you know, the next layer is those medium-term projects that are sort of end of this year, beginning of next year. And again, the approach to those at the moment is really around looking at what this current situation is doing, looking at the implications it has with social distancing, with health, with washing hands, transmission, all that kind of thing. That's sort of coming into play a lot. I think people's mindsets are changing. If nothing else comes out of this entire situation, I think we will be a healthier population in general, because we're starting to, you know, really pay so much more attention to what we're touching and how we're touching it and who's touched it before us and things like that. So that approach to how events are delivered and how events are run moving forward, I think is something that we're building into that medium and longer term planning. There's probably two mindsets for us at Sold Out around all of this. There's obviously the business and the commercial side, and there's the very, I think, personable, you know, emotional side to all of this. And I was just making a note then, Steve, as you were talking, that our objective as event professionals, so presumably all of the participants on this call are event professionals, you know, as the panelists are, and our core objective is to bring people together. And so I think there is a really deep impact that this current situation has for event professionals, whether they're at the supplier, agency or client side, because we are designed, and our daily objective is to bring people together. And at the moment, we're being told, no, you're not allowed to do that. You cannot accomplish your task. And I think for event professionals who are always, overcoming challenges, diverting, troubleshooting, finding solutions to create those experiences, being told that, we can't bring people together, we kind of feel like we're in handcuffs at the moment. And so it is, it's been a really interesting, but as Steve said, it's been a really quick pivot. We can't, I think, as event professionals, there's two responses to the situation. You either spiral and end up rocking in the corner, or it really puts a spark plug in you and you drive forward. And from Sold Out's perspective, similarly to Steve, reviewing systems and processes, operational management systems, bringing those all up to speed, clearing warehouses, finding more efficiencies and effectiveness in our delivery has been a bit of a focus for us at the moment. So we're fortunate. We have complementary services within the business, whether it's event management or the warehousing or signage production. So there's still a lot that can be done at the moment. But a lot of what is being done at the moment is, as Steve said, it's for that bounce back, for the 2 steps ahead when these restrictions get lifted.
Yeah, I think that's great, Thomas. And I think it's great that you call out the personal cost, or the personal impact and opportunity that's there alongside the business implications that we all need to be mindful of, obviously, right now, and then to make sure we're in a good place as we come out of this. And I will come back to your thoughts around what next looks like and the timeline on things. I think that's obviously something that's front of all our minds. So we'll come back and get your thoughts on that as well. I'll introduce Shannan Gove from Rosterfy. Hello, mate. Can you give us a rundown of what you're working on at Rosterfy, and for those that don't know your work, and how this has affected you? I know you're going to have an interesting perspective, being sort of a central hub of the industry, being a supplier to the industry in Australia and internationally as well. So keen to hear your perspective on what's been going on.
For sure, mate. And thank you for having us on, and appreciate Steve and Tom. Your points there very similar to the way we're approaching things, and from our clients' perspective, the way that they're seeing things too. Also good to see a few friends there in the attendee list. I think, like all of us, there's a couple of good friends that are all going through the same thing and all interested in the same probably responses that we're all going to have, which is great. So for those that aren't aware of Rosterfy, white label workforce management technology, I guess really built from the events industry itself. Andy, we first worked together probably nearly 10 years ago, along with quite a few people on this call, Melbourne Marathon and others. And that was from our event workforce group days, now Spark Event Group. And I guess that spawned the need for a centralized workforce management platform, a better way to manage workforce, both paid and volunteers. And that is what Rosterfy is. And we're lucky enough to work with some of the largest events in the world, and in particular mass participation events too, which I know a lot of people on this call are coming from. I was actually by chance, had a good chat to good friend Chris Robb yesterday, talking about the mass participation industry and how it's looking for this year. And I think, how does it affect us? It's obviously challenging massively for a lot of our clients. Good example being someone like Spartan Race in the US, laying off something like 90% of their staff and effectively postponing all events. They had some really big plans for this year, and what timing for them to be purchasing Tough Mudder only a couple of weeks ago before all this kicked off too. So we've been in the middle of a lot of those conversations about how can we support. And I think the one sentiment we're pulling out of it from everyone, and it's similar to what Thomas was saying, is that it is time for pause now for a lot of people. I think if anyone was given the opportunity to press pause and spend more time with family, call it 12 months ago, they would have taken it. And now we've all forced into that situation. And I guess, yes, it's affecting us as a business, but we are working on a lot of long-term projects, which is awesome. And I'm getting to spend more time at home with the family, with the little one. So, we're as positive as can be, because what's your other option?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess on that note, and I'm actually keen to hear from a few of our participants in terms of how they're sort of feeling about things right now, and maybe just drop in the chat box whether you're feeling positive, negative, or unsure at the moment. Get a sort of a bit of a stock take of where people's mindsets are at. I think mindset is obviously critical, as you've all touched on at the moment. And I think it's important to keep checking in on each other. I think some people are affected in different ways, and each day is probably different for different people as well. So if you can drop in the chat box how you're feeling right now, that might give us a sense for how people are feeling, I suppose, and going through it all. Going through waves of positive and negative, but trying to stay busy and connected. Hannah, I think that's a pretty good summary of how a lot of people are feeling at the moment. So what I do want to do is to start to look ahead, and I suppose short term and longer term. And I'll go back to you, Steve, first. I think I'm really interested to see what you think in your work, in the events that you're involved in, or more broadly, what you think will be next, and what will sort of stay the same, what might be different in terms of as we emerge out the other side of this. So some big questions there, mate, but what's your current sort of thinking?
Well, I think there's a bit of messaging land in the chat box there that talks about certainly uncertain. I think that's a really good summary. I think to me, the uncertainty is around what it will ultimately look like once we emerge. And I think my observation would be there's going to be a lot of events that are in different categories in terms of that sort of re-emerge, or whatever we want to sort of brand that. There's no doubt that I say there's no doubt, that's probably a bit of an oxymoron, but I think we're all trying to get a bit of a handle on what that time frame might look like. There's no doubt that from an Australian perspective, we're in a much better position to a lot of our global cousins. So so I think ultimately we have to be super positive about that. I think it could always be worse, and I think if anything, we can sort of come away from this period and establish a bit more perspective. I think right now in the events industry we're feeling it tough, but geez, you don't want to be a frontline health worker at the moment. So I think it's important to sort of just think about that. But in the context of events, ultimately we are all event professionals, and we want to start to establish a bit of a roadmap for how we return. And I think, just as I was saying before, I think the different events are going to have different challenges. I think it's realistic to think that any events that have a bit of an international flavour to it, whether that be an international travel aspect, I think they're going to feel the pinch for a little bit longer than domestically based events. I think it's realistic to think that the travel bans are going to remain in place for quite some time yet. So I think that's probably a something to keep in mind. But generally speaking, I mean, when we can return, I think it's really important to say that I think a lot of people over this period of lockdown are going to probably realise how much they're desperately craving, experiences and events and that sense of community and social value that they get out of events. And so I think to try to be optimistic, and my staff tell me I'm endlessly optimistic, a little bit too much sometimes, but I think you've got to think that when we re-emerge, events are going to potentially really benefit from that. I think if you've got events that have some sort of camaraderie sort of team aspect to it, then, you know, I think that's going to be potentially really beneficial, you know. So, yeah, so, you know, interesting times. And I think the uncertainty is that, you know, I think you do want to start to try to plot out a timeline, and we're just not there yet. You know, I think we're realistically a few weeks away at least before we can start to learn more about what that looks like coming back.
I think it's a really good point, Steve. I think we want to plan and we need to have a roadmap, don't we, as event people especially, but we've got to base that on the right information, don't we? And I think even today there's some more announcements that, you know, at least the current conditions in Australia will continue for a month, and I think New Zealand's fairly similar. So we can only base our decisions on what we know, and as you say, I think it's going to be different for each part of the industry, and even particular events are going to have their own circumstances, aren't they, in terms of what that roadmap, that re-emergence looks like. That the bump back in of the industry, I think it's you know, I think it's going to be interesting, and we need to be optimistic as you call out, and I think that's just the leadership that we all need, isn't it, to be making the decisions when we can, and be positive about the future. And
I think from my perspective, you know, now's probably, you know, I guess selfishly speaking, in terms of our season, there is there's a window of time right now to take a bit of a break and properly recharge the batteries, you know, which we would not ordinarily try and do this time of year anyway. So, you know, I don't know about others, but, you know, my garden's looking better than it ever has. So, you know, I think, and, you know, I've got 2 little boys at home that are loving me being at home at the moment. So, you know, I think taking the good with the bad is really important.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And I think I'll go to you, Thomas, in terms of your views, in terms of how this bounce back, this as the industry's unlocked, what that might look like for us. I completely agree with your points, Steve, as well, that I think, you know, we will see people want to come to get together again. And I think that's as we know, it's a very fundamental human need, and that's not going to go away. And I think even speaking to a lot of people, friends and family, that's the thing they're looking forward to doing, to come back together in whatever form that might be, going to the footy or going to the pub, meeting up with each other. So I think events will bounce back. And also, I think we always see that the general community likes to support people that have suffered adversity and industries that have been affected, as we saw with the bushfire crisis recently. And so I do think that we'll get a sort of a positive bounce back. It's just how that's stepped out, and when that happens, isn't it? I think that's the critical thing. But Thomas, keen to get your thoughts, your perspective from your business perspective, and then the wider industry, how you think these next steps are going to look like.
Yeah. So I think from our perspective as a business, there will be a bounce back. A lot of the conversations we've been having with clients and things like that is in line with what you were saying, Steve, that I think this isolation and this quarantining and this social distancing has made people realize just how much human face-to-face community interaction we have on a daily basis that we're now missing out on. And events are, you know, a central focus point for that. So there is certainly a large desire already to start planning, you know, those events and community gatherings after this. And I think there's actually going to be a lot more interest and uptake and engagement with communities after all of this that might not necessarily have attended events traditionally. You know, I live in Newtown, and I think I've been to one live band at the pub once in 3 years. As soon as these, you know, restrictions are lifted, I'm going to be there every Friday. I mean, you really start to appreciate, I think, what we used to take for granted. And so I saw one of the comments in there, you know, is there going to be a saturation of the events market? Of course, there's going to be a large number of events overlapping now that traditionally wouldn't have. But I also think there's going to be a larger audience looking to attend those events as well. So I think those two things might work hand in hand. One of the pieces I just wanted to touch on in what everything will look like moving forward and after this is probably around the integration of digital into events. When we look at, and Shannan, I'm sure you've probably got some really interesting experiences, particularly from the US. You know, you look at the way in America, you can order food and drinks directly to your seat in a large number of the stadiums. You know, there's a far greater digital integration into event experiences internationally than I think what we have and where we've gotten to as an industry here in Australia. And I think this whole situation and circumstance is potentially forcing people to become more familiar and friendly with technology and digital platforms that they might not necessarily have used previously. And so when we come back from all of this, I think the events, there will be more opportunity and more open-mindedness for larger amounts of digital integration, which is exciting because that creates a whole new experience for spectators and attendees. You know, as we said, new norms, what will return to normal, what won't return to normal. I think generally that the foundation, fundamentally, things will return to normal in as broad a sense as possible, but there will be, you know, more awareness, as I mentioned earlier, about health and safety. There's going to be a greater appreciation for that human interaction and face-to-face engagement, and some of those digital aspects of what we're seeing come into it. And just, Andrew, before I hand back, I just really wanted to quickly touch on some of those panelist comments, attendee comments in the chat. It's really interesting. I'm in a very unique position within our organization where I'm looking 12, 24, 36 months ahead as the day-to-day focus for me is really quite long-term. And so I think one piece of this situation has really brought me back into focusing a little bit more on the here and now. And there's, I think, a very common thread in that chat, which is keeping a positive mindset and trying to look forward and stay positive. But there are days of uncertainty. There are days of blah, and just not having that motivation and that drive. And so I think one really important thing for all of the attendees to take from this and for the participants to really recognize and acknowledge is that everybody is sharing that same sentiment. We are all going through those same feelings. Those feelings are normal, they're natural. And I think coming back to that human emotional element that I mentioned earlier, we as event professionals are designed to create excitement and joy and bring people together. And at the moment we can't do that. And I think that's probably where a lot of that uncertainty is coming from. One thing that we've spoken to our team about is leaning into that uncertainty, leaning into that, you know, those bluff days of no energy and no drive. That's not a bad thing. Event professionals run at 150%, 200% of the time. As Shannan said earlier, you know, we finally have an opportunity to pause and take a moment. And we've told our team, you know, that our expectations on them are not Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. During this, there's just that human element of living through this pandemic, and it's nothing that any of us have ever experienced before in our lifetime. So I think we have to go easy on ourselves and give ourselves a break a little bit, that we are having to live through an entirely new experience, and that's okay. Those feelings are all right. And I think maybe releasing ourselves from some of those expectations of that constant drive, that constant motivation, that constant achievement is really important. Personally, I've found, you know, 15 or 30 minutes of yoga in the morning has been such a nice way to ease into the day, and it kind of helps slow the mind a bit. So I think just reading a lot of those comments, I really just wanted to share. There are shared sentiments throughout the industry, and I think allowing yourself to slow down is really important. And if 30 minutes of yoga in the morning helps with that, or, you know, calling out a break every hour for a cup of tea and, you know, an episode of something on Netflix, then so be it. But that's okay. That's, you know, I think we really need to event managers, we don't have a healthy work-life balance at the best of times because we're all so focused on work, and we're really having to learn as event professionals what that balance is actually like at the moment.
Yeah, I think there's some important points there, Thomas. Whilst there's a lot of unknown around us at the moment, hopefully we can work on ourselves and look after ourselves within all that. And I think what I've heard from a lot of people is they're using the time and heard you'll speak today, use this time to invest in yourself and your systems and set yourself up to be ready for what's next, however that does look. So I think it's important to be doing that as much as we can right now. I'll come to you, Shannan. I appreciate all the comments in the chat. It's really interesting just hearing from each of you and all the different perspectives. So thanks for dropping those in. And there's a couple of questions there we'll come back to as well. But Shannan, I guess your thoughts in terms of short term, then longer term, from your perspective, as much as we do know at the moment. I think Thomas raised an interesting question which you might have views on around the sort of the balance between the physical aspect of events and the virtual online component. I think no doubt, as Thomas called out, this is a prompt to change people's behaviours, and whilst it's all sort of switched to virtual for the moment, I'm sure that we'll return to the physical component being at the core, but I think there might be much more integration of online virtual components in those experiences. But your thoughts on that, and then the wider picture?
Yeah, I think the virtual's a great stopgap for the time being. If, in my honest opinion, I think it's great to see. We work with Mother's Day Classic all around the country, who I think are a great example of someone that I think within about 48 hours turned a national massive event series into virtual, which is incredible. But how long lasting that will be, who knows? I think everyone on this call and everyone that participates at our events is there for the physical connection and connectedness to their community, and that's not what virtual events are. Sure, there'll be lasting implications of that, but I think this is just a time to test it and see how it is. Also, the commercial side of virtual events, how are you getting the revenue you need to operate at the level when you're only charging a small amount for that, and rightly so. I think that's a challenge. And I think another challenge here, and it was brought up in the comments, is around yes, there will be a boom when we all come back. I think we all agree. Everyone's, can't wait to get back out there in time for you to get down a local bar on the Friday, go and watch some live music. I think absolutely that's the sentiment, but I also am concerned about if a massive economic impact here, not just in the events industry. All of our consumers have been hit here, and I think, will people have the money to spend on going back out there all the time to go to these events when they come back? I think that will be an interesting thing to watch and see when we come out the other side. I'm conscious of repeating what Steve and Tom have talked about. I think I agree with most points mentioned there, but for me, I think trying to be as realistic as possible and almost looking at 2020 as a pause for nearly all mass participation events, because sure, we all want to get back up and running, and people talking about, I see a lot of enthusiasm out there about, we'll be back in September or whatever it is, and great, sure. But it is still very early days. I think there's a lot of people on this call, organizations are still working out where their headcount sits. They're still spending the first 3 weeks of this 4 weeks working out where their business is. And now, secondly, where does headcount sit? And then I think the other part of this is when things come back, the government regulations, as was brought up in the comments, will be changing the way that these large events happen. I think that's one. And then my last point on that, we had a good meeting yesterday with our friends at Eventbrite, and their biggest point was around, for international acts or artists and international travel for events, not just artists, but crew and suppliers overseas, importing and moving stuff around the world. There's going to be big changes on that too. So I think a more national and localized appearance and change for the events industry will be something that I'm expecting out of this a little bit compared to the bulk movement all around the world. Lots of people connecting and doing that sort of thing. I think at least for the next 12, 24 months, that will be a change that I'm expecting.
Yeah.
And I think at the same, just if I can touch on that point, Andy, I think, when, I would make mention of the fact that if you're a TV product and you're based in Australia, based on how much better we're performing from a health perspective, and an overall global audience that's assembled, desperate to watch sport on the tally. I mean, absolutely, we don't want to rush this back in any sense of the word, but there would be people rubbing their hands together thinking there's an opportunity to put some Australian sport on the tally, and expose it to the world. So interesting sort of, as we've seen already play out, just the sort of just that broadcast sort of commercial interest in the whole thing continues to be, a real pressure applied on some of the sports, etc. I'm glad I don't live and breathe that every day, because that would be a really tough environment to operate in right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And I think it's a good point. There's a lot of tough decisions that have had to be made, but I think there's also going to be some interesting opportunities in how we can look at the experiences we provide and how they may be redesigned. And some comments and questions here. Will people, I suppose, want to come together, or will they, suppose, behave differently in the way that they think about events and want to attend events? And I'm sure that'll change and evolve as we get back to the norms of society, but there might be some interesting events that emerge, which are smaller, localized events firstly, and perhaps with some sort of innovative concepts, and then back to the full-blown events that we saw in the past. But
I think just to add to that as well, and I think an interesting thing we've seen, and as an extension of what we're talking about just at the moment, I had a really interesting conversation with one of our clients, brand side, and they are talking, as Shannan, as you said earlier, I think people are still trying to figure out what headcounts are and what organizations look like moving forward, which is a really interesting point. And, as event agencies and as delivery and experiential agencies that we are, and whether we're talking about the panelists who are client side or venue side or supply side, these brands, these organizations, whether they're sponsors or event partners or event owners, they have seen obviously a significant impact in revenue, and that impact to their revenue is currently ongoing. So they're still trying to determine what their budgets are going to look like moving forward. And there's two key approaches to that. One is obviously to pull in the reins, stop the spending, tighten the belt, to see where these brands and these budgets land moving forward. And the other one is to really use this time in the captive audiences to invest and spend. And I think one thing that we've been seeing from some of our clients and some of those brands is there is a need to really recapture the market once these restrictions are lifted. And there's a need to really capture audiences and engage attendees and engage communities to recapture that revenue spend down the line. And so I think what that's going to mean for us as an event industry is that events and experiences, they really need to become a lot more, consumer, spectator, attendee focused. Quite often there'll be, brand experiences as a really light touch point on game day, outside the stadium or outside the arena. There might just be a digital campaign that runs on behalf of a sponsor in association with a partnership or an event that they're sponsoring. But I think what we're starting to recognize is that human engagement, that face-to-face physical contact to really recapture those markets and really re-engage those audiences is something that's starting to be identified for the bounce back later on.
So, Thomas, I suppose further to that, and interested in everyone's thoughts, but I guess I've sort of been a observer of recent times that once you take something away, people realise the value of it, and I think that once events have been removed from people's lives, or from brand campaigns, obviously sport, it really is a series of events, and so whether you remove the events, when you take the fans away from an event experience. I was at the SCG working with Cricket Australia team, and that was one of the first events, or probably the first events on Friday the 13th, which locked the gates and I suppose went ahead without anyone in the stadium, and it was quite a surreal environment, and really demonstrated how important fans are to an experience. And again, once you take something away, I think people realise the value of it. We've quite often struggled to articulate the value of events to our audiences, to our sponsors, to brands, even to government perhaps. But I think, because a lot of that is intangible, but I think now it's been removed, hopefully that will sort of demonstrate in a roundabout way how important these events are in the whole scheme of things. So the question, do you think brands and people that are looking to use events as a platform will recognise that and invest further?
Yeah, I think a lot of the communication that we've been seeing, a lot of the messaging that we're seeing come out is actually a very quick realization across all of those layers, whether it's government, venues, different stakeholders, recognizing the value that those events have played. 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, we were having conversations with stakeholders to help them understand the value of those events and to talk to them about the investment and input that they can have on events and things like that. And it was a very different conversation then than some of the conversations we're having now, where these stakeholders are actually coming to us saying, well, actually, how can we bring audiences and people and community together again, and how can we invest in those events and experiences to really build those resilient and strengthen those communities. And there's a really interesting piece of study that's been done, which it shows in Australia, for every dollar that is invested in sport, there is an economic return of $7 to the government. And so I think when we're looking at the return on investment that these stakeholders want to see, where events may have been one of the opportunities for them to gain that investment, I think it is really starting to focus into those events as a key opportunity for return. And is that because the digital social market is becoming more saturated with so much more content, with people in lockdown, and they're starting to realize we're going to need a point of difference when things come back? I do feel that the event agency's job of communicating the value of events and experiences has possibly been made a little bit easier at the moment, because the general community sentiment is, I can't wait to get back out, and I can't wait to go to an event, and I can't wait to be with my friends again. So as you said, Andrew, our managing director, Kim Voss, he's called out a couple of those same thought processes that you had around smaller events, more bespoke events, more intimate experiences for smaller numbers of people, possibly higher value experiences, deeper meaning experiences for people in the early stages, as opposed to necessarily those large mass participation events to begin with, perhaps, or at least alongside and simultaneous to. So there's probably a really interesting opportunity for brands to rethink how events need to be done. And I'll point to Antoinette, her comment in there. We've worked with Antoinette quite a bit. And, as Antoinette's mentioned there, is there going to be a requirement for more budget to support bringing more people to these events? Yes. And equally, I think it is also shifting the expectations that people have around the requirement of having a sold out event, which seems quite ironic given the name of our company. But, perhaps we don't need, to sell every single ticket to still have a really meaningful event. I think, if we can look at the scalability of events and possibly, there's been a historical trend that events constantly need to grow. We need more attendees every year. We need to increase the revenue every year. There's possibly an argument here or a discussion to be had around the sustainability of smaller events with a more intimate attendee and spectator engagement.
Yeah, I think they're good points, Thomas. And I think there's a couple of comments in the chat as well, I guess, asking some really relevant questions. And there's going to be some negative impacts and hangover from this phase, as we know. I mean, we're right in it at the moment, and I'm sure we're feeling it at the moment. But people will have reduced budgets themselves. Organisations will, there's going to be a lot of adversity to risk and a lot of other factors which we haven't ever really touched on today. And I think we're all naturally sort of taking a very optimistic view of things, but we need to be very pragmatic about things and making sure that the business models that we have in place for the future are fit for the purpose and are improved and have greater resiliency, I think, for the future. So there's no doubt there's going to be a lot of clever thinking needed, but event people are good at coming up with solutions and coming up with creative solutions. So I'm sure we'll see some interesting stuff emerge. I'm conscious of coming sort of towards the end, so I might just do a quick around the grounds, around the panel again, and if there's any final questions. I think looking at what Danielle and Cameron sort of asked, it's probably really just going back to you each in terms of what's next for you and sort of longer term, how you're setting yourself up or your teams up for success, and any advice you can give to people listening in, I suppose, in terms of what they could be doing as well. So might go back to you, Shannan.
Yeah, look, I think it's I was really conscious coming into today to pretend anyone had the answer. I think it's the biggest point is that it's still so early in this space. Colleagues this morning have lost their jobs. It's still people working these things out. So my only point would just be to almost try your best to enjoy this time with your family that you've got. And if there's anyone that can make ends meet or get through a period, it's people in the events industry. So if you need to go and do something else for the next 3, 4, 5 months, which to your point, we need to be pragmatic about this situation, Andy, and everyone just needs to look after themselves as well while you can, then go and do that and try and be as positive as we can. It will come back. I do see this as a 1 year kind of pause, just take it easy, get set for next year situation. That's the way I'm looking at things. And yeah, try and enjoy your time with your family as best you possibly can.
Good call out, Shannan. I think it's a good time to focus on what's important, isn't it?
Yep.
Thomas, how about you in terms of what's on your mind for sort of setting yourself up to come out of all this?
I think from our perspective, we are, as Shannan said, we're really enjoying this time at home and time with family. And I know Danielle, said in her comment there, what are you focusing on during this downtime? And I think the focus is the downtime. It's using this time for self-growth, rest, and repair, because that means that we can be the best event professionals to our clients and suppliers moving forward. Look, I again agree with Shannan. None of us have the answer. We just have what we're going through and what we're working on at the moment. as I said at the beginning, we're really, really fortunate to be in quite a unique position, perhaps within the industry, where we still have long-term projects that we're working on. We still have day-to-day client, actions that we're delivering. So we're quite fortunate that we have that to continue to maintain some normality, I think, for us on the day-to-day. But because we have that, I think I have a bit more of a focus and attention onto that personal, emotional side. Jane from CSM mentioned earlier in the comments around that, just that reaching out and that connection between event professionals in the industry. I think it's been amazing, and not with a business objective, not with a commercial outcome attached to it. It's just phone calls and conversations and messages and emails. And I think if one thing we've really noticed throughout this entire experience is that some of those social barriers have come down, perhaps. I think sort of like all bets are off around how we feel that we should be interacting or relating to people, because there is a far greater human experience that we're all living through, and that sort of brings us all onto the same playing field and creates a sense of commonality. And so, when you couple that with the A-type personalities we have in the event world, it is really a really unique, positive opportunity, I think, just for people to connect and engage. And we've been quite open, and I think, happy to share in this forum as well. If anyone wants to reach out for a phone call or send a message or send an email, by all means do. We're here for a chat, we're here for a conversation. And I don't think it is about having the answer, but it's about being able to talk through our own experiences, find those commonalities, and refocus on the future.
Thanks, Thomas. And look, I appreciate you offering for people to make contact with you. And I think I'm sure the other guys are the same. Perhaps touch base on LinkedIn, or reach out to me. I know that, as we said at the start, everyone's got their own personal thing going on, and I think we've tried to address a lot of things today. But you'll have your own specific questions, so please do reach out to myself or any of us and help for help in those areas. So I'll go to you, Steve, I suppose, in terms of last thoughts from you in terms of looking ahead.
Yeah, so look, I think Shan's spot on. Is none of us have the answers just now. We've all had to take a big bite of humble pie and realise that we are non-essential at the end of the day. Right now, all the focus needs to be on essential. But in the meantime, it can't hurt for us to continue to lobby, for a world where we do become essential, because I actually think in terms of the physical and mental health benefits that events provide, it's going to be an important part of the recovery process. So when the time's right, I think maybe there's some, potentially some government investment required in events. Right now, they've got to focus on the safety net, which they're not doing a fabulous job of at the moment. So, but there'll be a time where they need to focus in on recovery, and I think participation in events, whether you're a fan or a spectator, any sort of consumer, is going to become more crucial, and maybe considered essential down the path. Yeah.
Great call out, Steve. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Look, we're coming to 10 o'clock, so thank you to everyone who's tuned in today. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate your honest comments in the chat, the questions. I'm sure each of the guys would be more than happy if you touch base with them. LinkedIn's probably for the best approach. I know they're all fairly tuned into LinkedIn, so they'll come back to you. Please reach out to myself. We'll put this event show out. So if you want to share that with other people or go through it again, we'll put that out later today. There's more podcasts. The best place to go to is my website, where all the event show stuff sort of lives. As I said, we'll do this each week, as long as they're sort of offering some value to everyone. Got another great group of guests lined up for next week. Also keen to hear from you who you would like, or the topics that you want us to cover off. Obviously, a lot of the comments today will give us a good steer in terms of who we might talk to in the future, the things that you want to learn more about. So please drop me a line with thoughts on that. If I can help at all, please jump on the website. There's a lot of great guests on previous event shows. We did a recent special on the coronavirus situation, which was really popular. There's a bunch of stuff you can download for free. If you need some support at the moment, just let me know. So thanks again to all our panelists. Thanks for giving up your time today. Really appreciate it. Please keep following, and we look forward to chatting more soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks to everyone. It was good fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, guys. See you all soon.
See y'all.